Have you ever felt like you are just completely drowning in a sea of permanent outrage?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
I mean, I really want you to think about that feeling for a second. It's like you were constantly walking on eggshells. You go into a meeting at work and you are terrified of using the wrong vocabulary.
Right.
Or you sit down at the dinner table with your family for a holiday and the air is just thick with tension.
Mm.
Because you know that one stray comment is going to entirely detonate the evening.
Exactly. It's exhausting.
It really is. Or you are just innocently scrolling through your feed, and every single interaction, every comment thread just feels like an elaborate trap. It is as if no one anywhere can even agree on basic fundamental facts anymore.
Yeah, you sit there staring at your screen wondering, how in the world did we get here?
Right. And we usually have a very standard list of villains for this. We blame politics. We blame the social media algorithms for feeding us rage bait. We blame the 24-hour news cycle.
Cheer the usual suspect.
But what if the root cause isn't actually any of those things? What if those are literally just the symptoms? What if the real issue is a fundamental, almost invisible collapse in how we understand the very concept of words themselves?
That is a profound and honestly incredibly unsettling question.
Yeah.
Because it shifts the focus entirely off of the technology and onto our fundamental operating system as human beings.
Yeah.
I mean, if we lose the shared understanding of what language actually is and what it's supposed to do in the first place, then of course all of our downstream systems are going to fail.
Like politics and journalism.
Exactly. Politics, journalism, social media, they are going to feel completely broken because they are built on a foundation that has structurally dissolved.
And that is the absolute core mission of our deep dive today. We're going to unpack exactly why our cultural discourse feels so entirely fractured and so exhausting.
It's a big undertaking.
It is. We are going to explore this fascinating and frankly somewhat radical idea that reconnecting our words to reality itself might be the ultimate and perhaps the only viable fix.
And we have a lot of material to get through to do that.
We really do. We are looking at a really compelling, dense stack of sources today. We've got an academic abstract, a highly detailed series of university lecture notes, a fascinating Q&A session with students, and some deeply analytical feedback from a senior academic who is referred to affectionately in the texts as a Dr. Father.
Which is a great title, by the way.
It is. And finally, a sweeping public essay titled The Architect of Truth, Reclaiming Reality from Power. All of this material is authored by or revolves entirely around the central thesis of a modern thinker named Jamie Thornberry.
And before we dive into the deep end of this, I do need to make a very clear, crucial note to you, the listener.
Please do.
These sources touch on some incredibly heavy and, frankly, often highly politically charged themes. Thornberry's framework leaves almost no stone unturned.
No, it doesn't.
It spans intense critiques of both left-wing and right-wing institutions. It delves into deep theology, historical philosophy, and the fundamental nature of power and coercion in society.
It's heavy stuff.
Very heavy. And because of this, I want to be entirely transparent. We are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing these specific viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Right. Our job today is strictly to impartially report on Thornberry's framework.
Exactly. We are here to convey the ideas contained in this original source material as accurately and objectively as possible. That way you can explore these concepts, weigh their merits, and wrestle with them for yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because Thornberry does not start small. He starts with a massive sweeping diagnosis of the problem. A historical shift that he calls the Great Mutation.
The Great Mutation, yes.
He argues that we have lost what he terms the quiet givens. Now, quiet givens sounds almost poetic to me, but I know it has a very strict academic meaning here. So what exactly were these givens, and how on earth did a whole civilization just lose them?
Well, to understand the mutation, we first have to understand the healthy organism, what it actually mutated from. Historically, the study of language, which is known as classical philology, relied on three very specific quiet givens. And they are called quiet because they were assumptions so deeply foundational, so baked into the human experience, that people barely even realized they were making them.
Like breathing.
Like breathing, or like how you don't think about the floorboards when you're walking across a room. These were the floorboards of human thought.
I like that. Floorboards of human thought.
So the first given is that meaning precedes analysis. The second is that language answers to reality. And the third is that understanding is a form of participation.
I'm going to need to slow us down right out of the gate here because those 3 points sound a little like a graduate seminar.
Fair enough.
And I want to make sure we really grasp them. Let's look at the first one. Meaning precedes analysis. Explain that to me like I'm 5 years old. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, imagine you were standing in a forest and you were looking at a massive ancient oak tree.
All right, I'm picturing it.
Before you even open your mouth to describe it, before you analyze its bark, before you categorize it as a specific species of flora, the tree means something. It has an inherent reality, a presence, a form that exists completely independent of your observation of it.
So it's just there doing its tree thing.
Exactly. The meaning of the tree is already there. Your analysis comes second. You are arriving late to the party.
Okay, so reality is the host of the party, and I'm just showing up trying to figure out what's going on.
That's a great way to put it.
And that naturally bleeds into the second given right. Language answers to reality. That essentially means that the world exists, it is objectively real, and our words are just trying their absolute best to describe what is already out there.
Precisely. In the classical view, the mountain is there, whether you name it mountain or montane or yama. The physical rock and dirt do not care about your vocabulary.
They really don't.
Therefore, your word for mountain is strictly accountable to that physical reality. If you point to a valley and call it a mountain, reality doesn't change. Your language is simply incorrect. It has failed to answer to reality.
It's just a wrong word.
Yes. And the third given understanding is a form of participation, means that when you accurately name the mountain, you are participating in the truth of the universe. You are aligning your mind with what actually exists.
That sounds incredibly grounding, actually. It sounds stable. So where did the wheels fall off?
Well, Thornberry points out that in the modern era philology, the study of texts and language shifted dramatically in two distinct phases. First, it became a purely historical critical tool.
What does that mean exactly?
Instead of reading an ancient text to find out what is true about the world's scholars, started treating language merely as a fossil record. They looked at a text just to figure out the socioeconomic status of the guy who wrote it in, say, 14th century France.
Oh, I see.
The text became something to be explained away as a product of its time, rather than something making a genuine, enduring truth claim about reality.
So it's kind of like looking at a beautiful painting of a landscape, and instead of appreciating the landscape, you just obsessively analyze the chemical composition of the paint to figure out where the artist bought their supplies.
That is a perfect analogy. You missed the entire point of the painting, but then the shift went even further. It moved from being a historical tool to a sociological tool.
And I'm guessing that is the real turning point, the actual mutation. Because sociology is about people groups and dynamics.
It is the absolute tipping point. Because once you view language fundamentally as a sociological phenomenon, it is no longer seen as a humble bridge to objective reality.
What does it become?
It becomes viewed entirely as a cultural artifact. It becomes a cognitive constraint. And most importantly, most dangerously, according to Thornberry, it becomes an instrument of power.
An instrument of power.
Yes. Language becomes a site of struggle. It is no longer about meaning objective reality. Instead, language becomes entirely about who controls whom.
Wow. And Thornberry distills this entire massive historical shift into what he calls a single axiom of modernity. And this is a heavy one. If you are listening to this, maybe pause and let this sink in.
It's the core of his whole argument.
The axiom of the modern world is there is no given meaning prior to language.
That is the load-bearing beam of the entire modern predicament, according to the lecture notes.
Because if you accept the premise that there is no meaning before language exists, that the oak tree in the forest essentially has no meaning until a human being comes along and imposes a word onto it, then the cascading effects across society are absolutely staggering.
Staggering is the right word. What's fascinating here is how this completely alters human orientation. If language creates reality, then any claim to objective telos, which is the philosophical term for inherent direction, design, or purpose, is immediately viewed as merely ideological.
Because there is no actual design to point to.
Right. You get what Thornberry describes in his notes as an obsession with origins without purpose structure, without direction, and usage without truth. People become obsessed with how a word is used to exert dominance, but they completely abandon the idea that the word might actually point to something real and true.
There is an analogy in the text from the Q&A session with the students that I wasn't entirely sure I grasped at first, but the more I think about it, the more terrifying it is.
The sealed room.
Yes, the
Yeah.
sealed room. Thornberry says that this kind of linguistic relativity turns human thought into a sealed room, arguing about the shape of its own walls. Can you break that down for me?
Let's picture it. Imagine you were born inside a windowless, soundproof room. All you have ever known is the inside of this room. In this analogy, the room is language.
Okay, I'm in the room.
Now, if the classical view is true, if language answers to reality, then there is a window in that room. You can look out the window and see the oak tree, the mountain, the stars. You can use the words inside the room to point at the things outside the room.
But in the modern view, the mutation view,
In the modern view, there are no windows. There is nothing outside the room, or at least nothing you can ever access. Language is the absolute outer boundary of all human thought.
so you're just trapped.
Completely.
Yeah.
Therefore, you have no external anchor. You have no way to adjudicate what is actually true outside. You and the other people in the room are just endlessly pacing around, debating the paint job, arguing about the shape of the walls, completely trapped within your own vocabulary.
And whoever shouts the loudest or whoever convinces the most people about the shape of the walls essentially becomes the dictator of that room's reality.
Exactly. It's just a raw power struggle at that point.
That is a chilling image. And that sealed room inevitably leads society to a critical fork in the road. Thornberry identifies this in his essay as a bifurcation. He says, we are presented with two completely irreconcilable paths for how we understand words.
Yes.
And he is very strict about this. There is no middle ground, no synthesis, no agree to disagree possible between them.
That is a crucial point to understand. These are mutually exclusive operating systems. You cannot run both on the same computer.
So let's map out these two paths, because this is where the dense philosophy really hits the pavement of our daily lives, our social media feeds, and our workplaces.
Yeah.
Thornberry calls Path A the constitutive model. You can think of this as the modern power primacy path.
In Path A, the core claim is that meaning is entirely constructed by humans. Truth is not an objective fact waiting to be discovered. Truth is contingent.
Meaning it depends on something else.
Right. It depends entirely on whichever regime, group, or ideology is currently in charge, or whatever narrative is most useful at the time. Most importantly, in this model, power precedes speech.
So power comes first.
Always. Your identity, your group affiliation, and your power dynamics define your reality completely. Your words are not descriptors. They are simply the tools or the weapons you use to enforce your reality on others.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Because I can hear people listening to this and saying, hold on, doesn't Path A have a totally valid point? Historically, people in power absolutely have used language to oppress people.
Oh, without question.
Think about propaganda. Think about how colonizers rename indigenous lands to erase their history. Isn't Thornberry just ignoring the reality of marginalized groups by pretending language is purely objective and innocent?
That is the exact pushback Thornberry receives in the Q&A source document, and it is a vital question to address. Thornberry does not deny that propaganda exists or that bad actors use words to manipulate. Of course they do.
So what's his counterargument?
The distinction he makes is philosophical. He argues that yes, power can abuse language, but Path A goes much further. Path A claims that power is all there is to language.
Well, I see the difference.
It claims that every interaction, from a political speech to ordering a cup of coffee, is fundamentally just a power struggle. If you adopt Path A, you aren't just critiquing propaganda, you are claiming that the very concept of objective truth is a myth designed by the powerful to keep the weak in line.
Let's ground this with a really mundane, like I'm 5 example. Let's role play this.
Okay.
We are at a coffee shop. I am the barista. You are the customer. You order a black coffee. In Path A, what is actually happening in that interaction?
In a strict, purely theoretical path, my order of a black coffee is not a simple exchange of information about a beverage. It is a negotiation of power.
How so?
Perhaps my tone of voice is an exertion of socioeconomic dominance over a service worker. Perhaps your response is an act of subtle resistance. We are constantly analyzing the hidden power dynamics beneath the words because the words themselves don't point to an objective coffee. They point to the relationship of dominance and submission between us.
And the sources outline how this plays out and how we interpret things in academia and media, what scholars call hermeneutics. In Path A, you approach every text, every historical document, every conversation with what is called a hermeneutics of suspicion.
Yes, the hermeneutics of suspicion. It means you default to assuming that texts and words are specifically designed to conceal more than they reveal.
You're always looking for the ulterior motive.
Always. You assume authority is always by definition coercive. In this worldview, words are literally weapons. Silence is violence. And to name something is an act of aggressive control.
Okay, let's look at the alternative. Contrast that with Path B, which Thornberry calls the responsive model. This is the classical realist logocentric path. And I know logos is a heavy term referring to the Greek concept of divine reason or order in the universe.
The foundational claim of Path B is that being reality itself, the structure of the universe is ontologically prior to language.
Ontologically prior.
Which simply means it exists first in the order of reality. The universe was here before we started talking about it. Language then acts as a witness. It acts as a measuring tape that answers to the reality of the lumber you are trying to cut.
So in Path B, truth is entirely about correspondence. Does what I am saying out loud correspond to the actual physical or logical world?
Yeah.
And importantly, in Path B, error is entirely possible. You can just be wrong. When you interpret a text in Path B, it's not about suspicion, it's about receptivity. You actually believe the author was trying in good faith to communicate something real, and you are humbly trying to receive it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the theological and political consequences of these two paths are diametrically opposed.
Let's look at theology first, which the Dr. Father feedback spends a lot of time on.
Right. In Path A, the power model revelation from a divine source is viewed as literally impossible. Theology just becomes therapy, a way to make yourself feel better, or it becomes politics by other means.
Because there's no outside reality to speak to us.
Exactly. Any historical claim that God spoke is immediately reinterpreted as mere psychological projection, or worse, a cynical political maneuver by priests to freeze their oppression of the peasantry into syntax.
But in Path B, the realist path revelation is actually logically coherent. If objective reality can be disclosed to human beings, then a creator God can speak first. Doctrine isn't just a political weapon drafted by men in robes to control the masses. It is an attempt to preserve a genuine historical encounter with the divine. Language bears witness to the divine rather than trying to invent or control it.
And politically, the contrast is just as stark.
Yeah.
In Path B, because words answer to reality, those words fundamentally bind the speaker. They act as a restraint on power.
Give me an example of that.
If a king says there is grain in the storehouse, but the storehouse is empty, reality proves the king a liar. False speech is recognized as something that actively corrodes civic trust, and precision in language is viewed not as a pedantic annoyance, but as a high ethical duty.
Let me bring in a brilliant, very visceral example from Thornberry's public essay, The Architect of Truth, to really cement this difference.
I know the one you mean.
Imagine you are driving down a winding mountain road at night, and someone runs out into the middle of the road, waves their arms, and yells, "Stop! The bridge is out." Now, in Path B, the realist path, those words are pointing to a physical fact. You can get out of your car with a flashlight and go check. The bridge is either structurally there or it has collapsed into the river. The words answer to the objective reality of concrete, steel, and gravity.
But look at that same scenario through the lens of Path A, the power path. If language doesn't point to objective reality, then those words, "the bridge is out," aren't actually tethered to the physical bridge at all.
What are they tethered to then?
The person yelling might just be using those words as a tool to control your behavior. Maybe they want to force you to take a different travel route that goes past their business. Maybe they just want the thrill of making you stop. The truth of the bridge is irrelevant. The only thing happening is an exertion of power.
That illustration makes it so incredibly clear why Path A inevitably collapses into endless rhetorical warfare. If words are not accountable to the physical bridge, if we can never just go check with a flashlight, then persuasion, manipulation, and intimidation are the only remaining currencies in society. It becomes a pure battle of wills.
That is exactly what Thornberry argues.
But wait a minute. Listening to all of this and looking around at our culture, Path A sounds incredibly dominant right now. It feels like the water we are swimming in. But doesn't saying all truth is relative fundamentally contradict itself?
You've hit on the core issue.
I mean, if all truth is relative, is that specific statement relative? Because if it is, I don't have to believe it. And if it isn't relative, then objective truth exists and the statement is false. This brings us to what I think is the most intellectually satisfying part of Thornberry's entire framework, the trap he sets for modern philosophy.
Yes. This is where Thornberry introduces what he calls the intelligibility test. And it is a devastatingly simple logical trap. He asks a very basic question. What are the absolute minimal conditions required for any genuine disagreement or any meaningful critique to happen in the first place?
Like, what has to be true for an argument to even exist?
Exactly. If you and I are going to argue about something, what must we both assume is true before we open our mouths?
Right? If you and I are going to argue about whether a movie was good, we have to at least share some common ground. Otherwise, we're just making unrelated noises at each other.
Exactly. Thornberry defines 3 minimal conditions for intelligibility. First, there must be a shared referential field. Even if we don't understand the movie perfectly, we have to agree we both watched the same film. We have to agree we are talking about the same reality.
Makes sense. What's the second?
Second, there must be stable inferential norms, which is academic speak for agreed-upon rules of basic logic. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. If we don't share logic, we can't argue.
And the third?
And third, there must be a clear distinction between persuasion and evidence. Tricking you into agreeing with me is not the same as proving I am right.
And Thornberry argues that if you deny these 3 things globally, which is exactly what the extreme version of Path A does, when it says language is a sealed room of power, then all discourse, all debate just collapses into performative power claims.
What's fascinating here is how he turns this into what he calls the parasitism argument. He argues that global constructivism, this Path A idea that all language is just constructed power and objective truth is a myth, is actually a parasite.
A parasite.
Yes, it is a biological parasite on the very realism it is trying to kill.
I really want to walk through this logic puzzle step by step, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you start noticing it in every Twitter argument and political debate. Let's say someone comes up to you, points a finger in your chest, and makes the ultimate path, a claim all language is merely power and manipulation. There is no objective truth. Thornberry says this claim falls into an inescapable 2-option trap.
Let's look at option A. The person is asserting the statement all language is power as a true objective fact about how the world actually works. But if they do that, if they claim it is objectively true, they are immediately contradicting their own claim that objective truth doesn't exist.
They are trapped by their own logic.
They are relying on the existence of the physical bridge to tell you the physical bridge is an illusion. They are borrowing the rules of Path B logic-truth correspondence to try and destroy Path B. The parasite needs a healthy host to survive.
And then there is option B, which is even worse for them. Let's say you point out this contradiction and they retreat. They say, okay, fine. My statement isn't an objective truth. It's just my perspective.
And that's where the floor falls out.
Well, if they admit it is not an objective truth, then the claim all language is power is by its own definition just a power maneuver itself. It is just them trying to manipulate you into submitting to their worldview. And if it's just a manipulation tactic, it carries absolutely zero intellectual authority, and you have zero obligation to listen to it or take it seriously.
It is airtight. The sources highlight how Thornberry describes this paradox perfectly in his lecture notes. He says it's like watching people use logic and clarity to argue that logic and clarity are illusions.
It's absurd when you put it like that.
It is like demanding someone believe the statement, words cannot tell the truth. If words truly cannot tell the truth, then that very sentence cannot be telling the truth either. It self-destructs the moment it is spoken out loud.
This feels like such a massive gotcha moment. But looking at the notes from the Dr. Father, that senior academic advisor who reviewed Thornberry's work, it becomes clear that this isn't just a new fight Thornberry invented for the internet age.
Not at all.
Thornberry is actually standing on the shoulders of historical giants here, though he is pointing out a massive bluff that many of the most famous modern philosophers somehow missed or willfully ignored. I want to spend some real time walking through this historical lineage, because understanding how we got here is crucial to finding our way out.
Yes, let's look at the timeline.
Let's start with the pre-moderns.
The feedback from the Dr. Father provides a truly brilliant sweeping map of Western intellectual history. Thornberry's position, Path B realism, is deeply fundamentally native to the pre-modern world. We have to start with Aristotle in 4th century BC Athens.
Okay, let's start with Aristotle.
Aristotle was operating in a world where philosophers were just beginning to rigorously categorize reality, and he was fundamentally committed to the idea that being precedes knowing. Truth for Aristotle was strictly about correspondence.
The Latin phrase used in the notes for this is adequatio intellectus ad rem. Translation, please.
It translates roughly to the adequation of the intellect to the thing, or more simply, the fitting of the mind to reality. Your mind is like a key trying to fit into the lock of reality. If the key matches the pins in the lock, it turns. That is truth. Language names what is.
So what would he think of Path A?
Aristotle would have looked at the modern Path A idea that language constitutes or creates reality, and he would have thought it was a form of madness.
The chain of custody is very clear for Aristotle. Words signify concepts in the mind, and concepts signify actual being in the world. If you break that chain at any point, human thought collapses.
Precisely.
And then we move forward to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, who takes Aristotle's framework and formalizes it even further, integrating it with Christian theology. For Aquinas, reality is intelligible, meaning we can understand it specifically because it is a given. It is a gift from a creator.
Yes.
Knowledge is receptive before it is active. You have to open your hands to receive the truth of the world. Language participates in truth. It absolutely does not generate it.
But the Dr. Father points out a critical caveat here. Neither Aristotle nor Aquinas had to face the large-scale, culturally dominant linguistic nihilism that we face today.
They had it easy in a way.
They didn't have to answer the sophisticated, weaponized claim that all language is power, because no one in their eras was seriously arguing that on a societal level. That is where Thornberry's modern application of these ancient ideas is so vital. He is using ancient armor to fight a very modern war.
So where did the fracture actually happen? Who ruined the party? If we had this stable, realist view for thousands of years, what broke it? The Dr. Father points to Immanuel Kant in the 18th century as the crucial, catastrophic pivot point.
Yes, Kant is the pivot. And it is vital to understand that Kant didn't set out to destroy reality. He was trying to solve complex problems about how the human mind perceives things.
He had good intentions.
He did. Kant didn't deny that objective reality existed. He called it the noumenal world, the thing in itself. But he argued that human beings can never actually access it directly.
I always try to visualize Kant's idea like someone who is born with a pair of unremovable rose-colored glasses glued to their face.
That's a very helpful way to think about it. Kant argued that the human mind inherently structures and filters our experience of reality. You can't see the world without the glasses. You can only see the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to you through the filter of your mind.
But didn't he think we all had the same glasses?
He did. Now, Kant thought all human minds shared the same filter, so we could still do science and have universal morals. But he introduced a fatal, creeping ambiguity into Western thought. Is reality actually disclosed to us? Or is it fundamentally constructed by our cognitive frameworks? He introduced a gap between the mind and the world.
And once you introduce that gap, it's only a matter of time before someone drives a truck through it. The notes actually contain an incredible burn regarding this.
Oh, the post-structuralism comment.
Yes, they say that modern post-structuralism is just Kant with courage removed. That is devastating for any philosophy nerds listening.
It's a brutal critique.
It means modern thinkers took Kant's gap but lacked the courage to maintain any sort of universal truth. And that leads us directly to the 19th century. And the man who drove the truck through the gap, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is the one who finally looked at the gap and said the quiet part out loud.
Nietzsche looked at Kant's idea that we can't access the thing in itself and essentially said, well, if we can't access it, it doesn't matter. It might as well not exist.
Just threw the whole thing out.
Nietzsche famously declared that truth is nothing more than a mobile army of metaphors. He argued passionately that language is merely a survival strategy deployed by a naked ape, and that power fundamentally and totally replaces correspondence. Nietzsche is the true, unabashed architect of Path A.
But crucially, and this is something people who quote Nietzsche often forget, Nietzsche knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that adopting this view led straight into the abyss of nihilism. He knew it destroyed morality, religion, and objective science, and he embraced that horrific cost.
He didn't flinch.
He didn't. He called for the Übermensch to create his own values precisely because the objective world was dead. The Dr. Father notes with a lot of frustration that today's modern inheritors, the people policing language on social media or in corporate HR departments, they want Nietzsche's hermeneutics of suspicion. They want the power to deconstruct their enemies, but they completely lack his honesty about the devastating nihilistic consequences of what they are doing.
Right. They want to destroy objective truth, but still want to objectively complain when someone treats them unfairly.
Exactly. Which brings us to the 20th century battle lines where things get incredibly messy. You have figures like Martin Heidegger trying desperately to rescue, being famously calling language the house of being. But Heidegger kept his philosophy so notoriously obscure and poetic that it utterly failed to hold back the tide of deconstruction.
And then you get Michel Foucault. If you have been to a university in the last 40 years, you have encountered Foucault's ghost.
Foucault is the final boss of this specific intellectual video game.
He really is. Foucault crystallizes the modern predicament perfectly. Knowledge equals power. There is no separation. Discourse, the way we talk about things, literally constructs reality.
So things aren't real until we talk about them.
In his view, yes. Madness, criminality, sexuality, Foucault argued these aren't objective realities, they are categories invented by the powerful to control bodies. Truth is completely dependent on whatever regime is in charge.
But this raises an enormous question, and this is where Thornberry dissects Foucault's massive bluff, and frankly, it is glorious to read. Foucault builds these massive, multi-volume, incredibly detailed historical critiques. He writes books on the history of the clinic, the history of the prison, using endless historical documents to prove that reality is just a construct of discourse.
Exactly. And here is the fatal flaw Thornberry exposes. To make those sweeping historical arguments, what must Foucault rely on?
Documents.
He has to rely on stable historical archives. He has to assume that a diary written by a prison guard in 18th century France means what it says. He has to rely on reliable, stable language that spans centuries. He has to rely on intelligible continuity.
It's the contradiction again.
He's claiming that language cannot convey objective truth, but he is writing thousands of pages of language and expecting you to read it and believe it is objectively true.
It is the parasite again. Foucault relies entirely on realism to argue against realism. He uses the tools of Path B historical evidence, logic, textual fidelity to build his Path A kingdom. And he just hoped no one would notice the contradiction.
And many didn't.
And then following him, you have Jacques Derrida, who takes it to the absolute bottom of the well, arguing there is no final meaning to any text at all. It's just endless deferral of meaning. Texts all the way down as the notes summarize him. Derrida knew his philosophy was corrosive to society, but he viewed that corrosion as a necessary liberation and refused to offer any repair.
The Dr. Father is highly complimentary of Thornberry here because he praises Thornberry for pushing past even near-contemporary allies, thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre and Charles Taylor.
What did they say?
MacIntyre famously warned that when language detaches from its moral purpose, all moral discourse collapses into manipulation. We stop trying to convince each other and just try to manipulate each other's emotions. Taylor wrote extensively on the modern loss of meaning.
So they saw the problem.
They did. But both of those giants often softened the metaphysical stakes. They focused on the social effects. Thornberry refuses to soften the stakes. He forces the issue back to reality itself.
The Dr. Father concludes his feedback by stating that Thornberry's thesis isn't just some culture war nostalgia for the 1950s. It is a pure, logically clean, razor-sharp test of which theory of language can actually survive the act of being spoken out loud without contradicting itself.
That's a great summary.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Thornberry doesn't just stay in the ivory tower of academic philosophy. He takes this pristine, abstract, logical argument and applies it directly to the real-world flesh-and-blood ethical costs of this debate. In his essay, he introduces a critical, terrifying distinction between error and defeat.
This is perhaps the most ethically urgent and emotionally heavy part of the entire framework. I want everyone to consider this carefully.
Please do.
Thornberry points out that in Path B, the realism model where language answers to the world claims can simply be wrong. And because they can be objectively wrong, they can be corrected by reality.
Because reality is the judge.
Right. But in Path A, the power-only model, the sealed room claims, cannot be wrong because there is no objective reality to measure them against. Therefore, they are never wrong. They are merely outcompeted, silenced, or defeated by a stronger narrative.
Let's pause and really think about the ethical devastation that causes on a human level. Think about a marriage or a deep friendship. If the concept of objective error doesn't exist, then the concepts of accountability, confession, repentance, and learning become completely incoherent.
They vanish entirely.
If I hurt you and you confront me, but we live in a path over, a world I can't say I was wrong. Because wrong implies an objective moral standard we both share. Instead, our argument is just a power struggle.
It becomes about leverage.
Exactly. If you make me apologize, you haven't corrected an error. You just exerted enough emotional leverage to defeat me. You weren't incorrect, you just lost the power struggle. It completely destroys the foundation of human grace and forgiveness.
And when you scale that up from a relationship to an entire society, The downstream civilizational ramifications are terrifying. If we sever the referent, if our shared words no longer point to a shared objective reality, then all of our core institutions rapidly hollow out. Let's look at the law.
Okay, let's look at it.
Law ceases to be a mutual search for objective justice and becomes mere procedural theater where the side with the most rhetorical power wins.
We see that happening right now. What about education?
Education completely stops being about discovering truth and passing down knowledge. It devolves entirely into narrative management and ideological conditioning. Journalism abandons the pursuit of objective reporting because objective reporting is seen as a myth in favor of framing stories to shape political reactions.
And politics.
Politics becomes what Thornberry hauntingly calls liturgy without transcendence. It is just empty rituals of power people performing outrage to signal their group identity with no actual belief that they are working toward a higher transcendent good.
Thornberry uses another brilliant analogy in his public essay, this one about gravity, and I want you to break it down for us because it highlights how cruel Path A actually is, despite its claims of liberation.
He says, imagine if I make a bold linguistic claim that gravity isn't real, it's just a social construct, and then I step off the roof of a 3-story building.
Reality's going to have a say in that.
Exactly. Reality does not pause on the way down to debate me. It does not deconstruct my argument. It corrects me immediately and violently. And Thornberry makes a crucial point that this physical pushback from reality isn't cruel. It is actually the only way human growth works.
It's a feedback loop.
The resistance of the real world is how a child learns not to touch a hot stove. It is how an engineer learns to build a stronger bridge. But look at what happens when you remove that objective floor.
Look at what is happening to society right now, especially to young people. The psychological toll is just immense. I see it every day online.
It is creating a generation paralyzed by anxiety.
It really is. Because young people today are constantly fed this diet of Path I philosophy. They are told that truth is relative, that they must construct their own meaning, live your truth, define your own reality. It sounds so liberating.
But it's a trap.
Yet at the exact same time, they're relentlessly judged, policed, and canceled for saying the wrong thing online or in public spaces. It creates this massive environment of intense, suffocating pressure, but with absolutely zero stable ground to stand on.
They can't win.
They're trying to navigate a minefield where the locations of the mines change every single day based on who currently holds the cultural power.
That is a perfect, tragic description of what linguists call semantic drift. When language forcefully detaches from being, every single term becomes provisional. Every definition is fiercely contested. Every claim is a strategic maneuver rather than a statement of fact.
Which brings us back to the outrage.
Right. This leads directly to the permanent outrage and moral exhaustion you mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive. People are deeply disoriented and exhausted because nothing stands still long enough to be trusted. You can't lean on a wall if you think the wall is just a social construct that might move tomorrow.
The sources also point to very specific, almost Orwellian linguistic symptoms of this collapse in the adult world. We are talking about bureaucratic, euphemism, semantic inversion, and category manipulation. Think about corporate jargon.
Oh, corporate jargon is the perfect example.
When a massive corporation fires thousands of people and calls it right-sizing the workforce synergies, or a government uses a sanitized euphemism to hide a brutal military reality, they are relying on the exact mechanism of Path A.
How so?
They are relying on the fact that they have the institutional power to sever the word from its painful, bleeding referent. They're using words not to reveal truth, but to actively avoid accountability to reality.
Which brings us to a very dark but inevitable ultimate conclusion. A society that treats language purely as an instrument of power will inevitably end up being ruled by those who are most willing to ruthlessly misuse that power. If there is no truth to restrain the king, the most ruthless king wins.
So what does this all mean for you? If you're listening to this on your commute or while washing dishes and you're thinking, okay, this is terrifying, the philosophical house is fully on fire. Foucault won Kant, broke our brains. What do I actually do about it?
It's a heavy burden to process.
It is, but Thornberry asserts strongly in his essay, The Architect of Truth, that you do not need to be a tenured philosopher to resist this collapse. Reclaiming reality is something ordinary people can do and must do every single day in mundane interactions.
The profound solution he offers is treating language fundamentally as a moral act. It is the deep-seated belief that words are not playthings. They are something you have an ethical duty to get right. He outlines 5 concrete, highly practical steps to practice this resistance in everyday life.
Let's walk through these 5 steps because they are incredibly actionable. I want to apply them to real life. Step 1. Care about accuracy.
That's the foundation.
He says, when you are evaluating a claim, whether it's a flashy news headline on Twitter or a piece of juicy office gossip about a coworker, the very first question in your mind must be, is this physically or factually true? Not, does this help my political side, or does this punish my enemies, or does this validate my feelings?
That alone would defang half of social media.
Really would.
What's the next one?
Step 2. Separate disagreement from danger. This is a direct counterattack on the modern notion that words are literal violence. We have to reteach ourselves that someone being factually wrong or someone holding a political opinion you find repulsive is not the same thing as someone causing you physical harm.
That's a huge distinction.
If we conflate being offended with being attacked, we justify using power to silence people instead of using evidence to persuade them. We have to restore the limits of disagreement. That's a hard one, but so necessary. Step 3. Use words carefully. Say exactly what you mean. Do not hide behind vague slogans, buzzwords, or bureaucratic jargon. If you mean something difficult, say it clearly. Accept the responsibility and the potential backlash that comes with naming something accurately in the real world.
Step 4. Accept correction. This requires immense humility. In a realist framework, being proven wrong is not a fatal moral failure. It is just a temporary mismatch with reality. It means your map didn't match the territory.
So you just fix the map.
You update the map and you move on. However, refusing correction when reality presents itself clearly clinging to your false map because of pride or tribalism, that is a profound moral failure.
Think about how much tension that would diffuse at Thanksgiving dinner. You know, I look at the data and I was wrong about that policy. It's like a magic trick that disarms power dynamics entirely.
It really is.
And finally, step 5, defend the truth. You have to be willing to speak the truth, even when it is deeply socially uncomfortable, or when it puts you at a distinct disadvantage in an immediate power struggle. Because every time you concede a truth to avoid conflict, you are handing over another piece of reality to power.
Thornberry emphasizes in his closing that this is an overarching existential choice that every society and every individual makes daily. There is no opting out.
You have to choose.
We are constantly choosing between path 1, where words answer to reality, truth restrains power, and error is fixable. Or we're choosing path 2, where words answer only to power. Power defines the truth, and brute force, whether physical or social, is the ultimate currency.
To believe that words point to an objective truth outside of ourselves is at its absolute core to believe in human dignity. It means you respect your listener enough to offer them reality, to let them weigh the evidence, and to allow them to freely agree or disagree.
It's treating them as an equal.
Yes. To deny that to believe words are only ever tools of power is to treat every single person you speak to as a mere target for manipulation. It reduces humanity to a pack of animals fighting over dominance.
We've covered massive complex ground today.
We really have. We've seen how we lost the quiet givens of language, how society bifurcated into a power model versus a reality model. We've seen how the power model ultimately self-destructs because the parasite has to borrow logic to attack logic.
It was quite a journey through history, too.
We've traced this fracture from Aristotle's correspondence theory through Kant's fatal gap right down to Foucault's archives. And most importantly, we've seen the real-world flesh-and-blood ethical devastation of a society that abandons the healing concept of error for the brutal concept of defeat.
But the final synthesis here is actually incredibly hopeful.
It is.
It's the realization that the sealed room is an illusion. We do not first speak and then somehow magically conjure reality into existence. We encounter the majesty and the resistance of reality first, and our speech humbly follows in response.
Re-anchoring our language to that reality isn't just some abstract academic exercise for philosophy majors. It is the only viable way to rescue trust, accountability, love, and human dignity from the jaws of absolute power.
If I may, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over.
Go ahead.
We've spent this entire time exploring Thornberry's framework, focusing entirely on human history, human sociology, and human philosophy. But if we connect this to the bigger picture and look to the immediate future, a fascinating and genuinely terrifying question emerges.
About AI, right?
Yes. If, as Thornberry argues, being precedes language, and if human language must remain fundamentally tethered to physical reality to survive without turning into a manipulative nightmare, what happens as we increasingly hand the bulk of our civic discourse over to artificial intelligence?
That is a staggering thought.
Think about the architecture of what we are building right now. We are currently training massive large language models entirely on human text. They scrape the internet. It is a completely closed loop of words answering only to other words.
There's no reality in there.
An AI model has no sensory access to being. It cannot step off a roof and experience the brutal correction of gravity. It cannot encounter the physical world, feel pain, or look at a tree. It only knows the word tree in relation to other words like leaves and branches.
It's the ultimate sealed room.
If AI never physically encounters objective reality, are we accidentally engineering the ultimate literal sealed room that Thornberry warned us about? Are we hard-coding a pure power-only text-referencing text language system right into the very fabric of our future?
And when that system inevitably begins to mediate our reality, writing our news, drafting our laws, mediating our conflicts, will it possess any concept of truth, or only the statistical probability of persuasion? That is a chilling, profound, and absolutely necessary question to ponder as we navigate this new era. It makes the defense of human reality all the more urgent. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly complex but deeply vital journey today. We invite you to keep questioning the narratives you are handed, keep seeking the resistance of reality, and most importantly, keep seeking the truth in your own words. Take care.